Hey guys, so this is going to be part 3 of the People of Sparks. I don't know why I keep calling it the City of Sparks. It's actually called the People of Sparks. I'm really sorry if my last video I wasn't doing like the best read aloud. My allergies were really bad. I was really tired. My eyes were swollen and I took some medication and I rested, and now it's about 5 o'clock. You guys are done with school for the day, and this is kind of the time of the day where I start um, looking at your work and getting ready for tomorrow. So I'm actually out back. I'm in my gazebo and I'm sitting on a swing. So um, let's get right into it because I don't want to prolong this video. Chapter 4, The Doctor's House. The sky had turned a deep blue now, almost black. At one edge shone a strike of brilliant crimson. In the houses of the village, one window and then another began to glow with a flickering yellow light. They walked and walked each time they came to a doorway or a gate in the wall, or stairs leading upward. Lena hoped this might be the house. Back in Ember, where she'd had the job of messenger, she'd been a tireless runner. Running was her greatest joy. Tonight it was hard just to walk. She was so tired. Her feet felt like bricks. But Dr. Hester walked on and on, with the boy trotting along ahead of her sometimes, and sometimes lagging back to stare at Lena and Mrs. Murdo and Poppy, until they came to the outer edge of the village. There, standing somewhat apart, was a low-roofed house, except for a glimmer of light on its two windows, reflected from the reddening sky. It was in darkness, huddled beneath a great brooding plant the shape of a huge mushroom. "Is that a pine tree?" Lena asked the doctor. "Oak tree," the doctor said. So Lena understood that tree must mean all big plants, and they came in different kinds. A path led to a wooden gate, which the doctor opened. They came into a shadowy, leaf-littered courtyard paved with uneven bricks. On three sides were the three wings of the house, like a square-cornered U. The eaves of the roof sloped down to form a walkway all around. In the failing light, Lena could just see that the courtyard was crowded with plants, some growing in the ground and some in the pots of all sizes. Vines wound up the columns of the walkway and crawled along the edge of the roof. "Come inside," the doctor said. She led the way into the door in the central part of the house. She and the boy went in. Lena stopped just inside the doorway, and Mrs. Murdo came up behind her, Poppy in her arms. They stood peering in the gloom. There was an odd, pungent smell, like mushrooms or leaf mold, only sharper. The doctor disappeared for a moment, and when she came back she held a lit candle. She moved around the room, lighting more. 2 candles, 3 candles, 4, until a wavery light filled the central part of the room. The corners remained in darkness. Come in," the doctor said impatiently. Lena moved forward. She felt grit beneath her soles of her shoes and the tickle of dust in her nose. She was in a long, low room with clutter everywhere, clothes draped over the backs of armchairs, a shoe on the saggy couch, a plate with some bits of food on it sitting on the windowsill. At one end of the room were 2 doors, both of them closed. At the back, a stairway rose into a dark square hole in the ceiling. At the other end of the room, in the corner, there was an open doorway, leading, Lena guessed, to the kitchen. Beside the doorway was a kind of hollow in a hall, framed by stones and containing some sticks and scraps of paper. The doctor stooped down before this hollow place and held her candle to the sticks and paper there. In a moment a flare leapt up. It was a bigger flame than Lena had ever seen, like a terrible orange hand reaching up and out. Lena's heart knocked hard against her ribs. She stepped backward, bumping into Mrs. Murdo. They stood staring. Mrs. Murdo, with a hand clutching Lena's shoulder. The doctor turned around and saw them. "What's the matter?" she said. Lena couldn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, which leapt higher and cracked. Mrs. Murdo tried to answer. It's, it's... She inclined her head toward the end of the room, where the first flame had become a dozen flames, licking upward, sending the flashes of orange light. "Oh," the doctor said. "The fire? You're not used to fire?" Mrs. Myrtle managed to smile apologetically. Lena just stared. "It stays in the fireplace," the doctor said. "Not at all dangerous." In Ember, there was never fire unless there was danger. Someone's electric wiring had frayed and ignited, or a pot holder had fallen off the stove's electric burner. The only fire Lena had ever seen that wasn't dangerous was the tiny flame of a candle. This fire scared her. In the window glass, reflections glimmered. The windows were set so deeply into the walls that there was a ledge at the bottom wide enough to sit on. The boy, Torrin, hiked himself up on one of these ledges and sat there, kicking his feet against the cabinet set in the wall below it. "Afraid of fire?" he said in a low, scornful voice. "Come in," the doctor said. "You can sit over there if you like." She pointed to some of the chairs at the other end of the room, far from the fire, so that was where Lena and Mrs. Myrtle sat. Poppy woke up enough to give a weak wail, and then she slumped into Mrs. Myrtle's lap. "This will likely be the last fire of the season, anyway. Nights will be getting warmer, and we will need one," said the doctor. A creak sounded from outside, and then rapid footsteps. Someone pounded on the door. Lena clutched Mrs. Myrtle's hand, but the doctor only sighed and moved to answer the knock. "Oh, it's you, William," she said. "What do you need?" "Some ointment," said a man's voice. "I need it right now. My wife cut her hand. It's bleeding all over." Come in, I'll get it," the doctor said, and she went into another room and rummaged around while the man stood shyly just inside the door, looking out of the corners of his eyes at Lena and Mrs. Murdo. The doctor brought him his jar of ointment, and he went away. No more than 10 minutes later, another knock came, this time from a young woman who wanted some willow bark medicine for her sister, with a pounding headache. Again, the doctor rattled around in the other room. She came out with a small bottle, and the woman hurried off with it. "Are you only a doctor?" Mrs. Murdo asked. "Yes," said Dr. Hester. "It's a never-ending job." She suddenly looked worried. "Did I give William the right jar?" Yes, the one on the third shelf. I'm sure I did." She gave a frazzled sigh. "Now let's tend to your little girl. Put her down." She patted the couch that stood against the wall, "and wrap her in this." She retrieved a knitted blanket that had fallen on the floor, gave it a shake, and handed it to Mrs. Murdo. "I'll give her a swallow of medicine." Poppy accepted 2 spoonfuls of medicine. It was something reddish that Dr. Hester poured from a jar, and spit out the third, whimpering. Lena's heart ached to see Poppy so sick. Most of the time, Poppy was a ball of energy, so quick and curious, you never knew what she'd do next. She might chew up a valuable document, for instance, or trot off an exploration of her own at exactly the wrong moment. Now she was limp and pale, like a little spout that hadn't been watered. Mrs. Murdo laid her on the bed. Lena sat by her and stroked her hair, and quite soon she went to sleep. The doctor disappeared into the kitchen, and Torrin climbed the stairs and vanished into the room above. All at once, Lena was overcome with tiredness. The disorderly house, the unfriendly boy, the fire, all of it was strange and disturbing, and Poppy was terribly sick, which worried Lena so much she felt a little sick herself. She sat down by Mrs. Murdo and laid her head on Mrs. Murdo's lap. She was vaguely aware of the clattering and chopping noises from the kitchen, and then she dozed off in a confusing dream of lights and shadows. "Dinner!" shouted Torrin. Lena bolted upright, and he laughed. "Have you heard of food?" he said. "Have you heard of eating?" They sat at the table, all of them but Poppy, and the doctor ladled out some in from a big bowl. Lena wasn't sure what it was. Cold potatoes, she thought, and something else. She ate it because she was hungry, but then she had eaten. But then, when she had eaten, she suddenly felt so tired again that she couldn't move. Quite tasty, said Mrs. Myrtle. Thank you. Well, said the doctor, certainly, you're welcome. She started to stand up and then sat back down again, looking flustered. Maybe you'd like to read or walk around, or we're a bit tired, said Mrs. Murdo. Perhaps we could just go to bed. Dr. Hester's face brightened. Bed? Yes, she said, standing up. Of course, why didn't I? Let's see. Where will we put you? She looked around, and an extra bed might be hidden in this. The loft, I suppose. No, said Torrin. That's my room. It's the only place with 2 beds, said Dr. Hester. Picking up a candle, she made her way through the clutter of the stairway. Don't touch my things, and Casper's things, cried Torrin. Don't be silly, said Dr. Hester, starting up the stairs. But where will I sleep? Torrin wailed. In the medicine room, said Dr. Hester. Tears had appeared in Torrin's eyes, but the doctor didn't notice. She appeared into the loft, and for a few moments Lena heard thumps and scrapes from above. Come on up, the doctor called. Lena climbed the stairs, and Mrs. Murdo came after, carrying Poppy. By the light of the doctor's candle, Lena saw 2 beds under a sloping ceiling. There was a chest at the foot of each bed. Some clothes hung from hooks, and some boxes were neatly lined up in the sill of the one window. 2 beds, but 3 of you, said the doctor. We could put the baby. It's all right, said Lena. She'll sleep with me. And a few minutes later, she was in bed, Poppy in the crook of her arm, covers drawn over them. Good night, Mrs. Myrtle said, from the other bed, and the candle was blown out and the room went dark. But not as dark as the rooms in Ember at night. Lena could still see a faint gray rectangle where the window was. Because of the lights in the sky, the silver circle and the bright pinpoints. What are they called, she wondered? And who is Casper? And how can the doctor stand to have that huge, awful fire right there on the floor of her house? Everything here was the opposite of Ember. Ember was dark and cold. This place was bright and hot. Ember was orderly. This place was disorderly. In Ember, everything was familiar to her. Everything was strange. Here, everything was strange. Will I ever learn to like it? She wondered. Will I ever feel at home? She held Poppy tight against her and listened to her snuffily breathing for a long time before she fell asleep. You know what I just noticed? I just noticed a mistake in this book. So all the chapters have been writing like chapters at the top, and then this one, it didn't. So chapter 5, this is chapter 5, it just doesn't say it. That's so weird. Oh! And then there's a chapter 5. The book made a mistake. They didn't even put chapter 5 where it was supposed to go, so this one's really chapter 6. Oh, I caught a mistake, you guys. Okay, the real chapter 5. The first town meeting. While Lena slept, the 3 town leaders were holding a meeting. They sat at the table of the tower room of the town hall, which looked over the plaza. Mary's hands were clasped tightly up in front of her. Ben scowled, his gray eyebrows bunched together, deepening the 2 lines between them. Wilmer pulled nervously on one ear and looked from Mary to Ben and back to Mary. They can't stay here, said Mary. There are too many of them. Where would we put them? How would we feed them? Yeah, said Wilmer, but where will they go? No one spoke. They had no answers for that question. Outside the settlement of Sparks, the empty land stretched for miles in all directions. They could go to Pine Gap, said Wilmer. Maybe? Mary snorted and shook her head. Ugh. Don't be ridiculous, she said. That's at least 2 weeks' walk away. How could these feeble people travel that far? How could they carry enough food with them? Where will they get enough food unless we emptied our storehouses and gave them everything? Wilmer nodded, knowing she was right. The people of Sparks knew of only 3 other settlements, and they'd heard from the roamers that those places were smaller and poorer than Sparks. Their inhabitants wouldn't want far extra mouths to feed either. The three of them gazed out the window and down the moonlit plaza, filled with strange sleeping people from a city under the earth. 400 of them, with no food, no possessions to speak of, and nowhere to go. What I fail to understand, said Ben, is why this particular misfortune has happened to us. He paused, looked in the air to his left, and frowned. This was a habit of his. He seemed to need to pause and frown every now and then put together his thoughts. Wilmer and Mary had gotten used to waiting through these pauses. I don't see that we deserve it, Ben went on after a few seconds. Having labored as diligently as we have, and just when we starting to see prosper at last, after so many years of, well, adversity is a mild word for it. The others nodded, thinking of the hard years. There had been winters when people shivered in tents and ate chopped up roots and shriveled nuts. There had been years of drought and plagues, of tomato worms and devastating crop failures that meant people had nothing to eat for months but cabbage and potatoes. There had been times when people had to work so hard to stay alive that they sometimes died just from being too tired to go on. No one wanted to go back to those times. So what do we do? Said Mary. If they can't stay and they can't go, what is the right thing for them to do? Well, there's the pioneer, said Wilmer, at the temporary solution. True, said Ben. A good thought, said Mary, and Wilmer beamed. So, what about this? Mary went on. We'll let them stay in the pioneer. We'll give them the water and the food. We have some extra in the storehouse. In exchange, they work. They help in the fields. They help in the building. They do whatever there is to do. We have to teach them how. As far as I can see, they know nothing. After a while, when they're stronger and they know better how to get along, they can move on. They can set up their own village somewhere else. We'll have to watch them carefully if they let them stay, said Ben. They're so strange. We don't know what they might do. They seem fairly ordinary to me, said Mary. Except for the business about living in a cave. You believe that? Said Ben. Mary shrugged. The question is, shall we let them stay? How long before we have to would we have to keep them? Said Wilmer, before they are ready to go. I don't know, like maybe 6 months? Let's see, it's near the end of flowering season now, Mary continued, counted out the months on her fingers. Shining, burning, browning, cooling, falling, chilling. They could stay through the summer and fall seasons and leave at the end of chilling. That would mean they'd be put on their own for winter, Wilmer pointed out. That's right, said Ben. Are you suggesting we keep them even longer? Will we be stretching ourselves to keep them at all? They fell silent again, considering this. Finally, Mary spoke. Shall we let them stay for 6 months then, she said, and teach them as much as we can? No one really liked this idea. They thought of the food the refugees would need, which would mean less for their own people. The bother of teaching them all the skills they needed to survive on their own. Each one, Mary, Wilmer, and especially Ben, wished the unfortunate cave people would simply vanish. But they weren't going to vanish, and the leaders of Sparks knew that they must, for the sake of their consciences, do the right thing. They wanted to be wise, good leaders, unlike the leaders of the past, whose terrible mistakes had led to the disaster. So they would be open-minded. They would be dangerous. Or they would be generous, not dangerous, generous. With this in mind, the three leaders voted. Mary voted the cave people should stay. Ben voted yes, reluctantly, and Wilmer voted yes. So it was agreed. They would give them a place to stay. They would help them for 6 months. After that, the strangers would have to take care of themselves. Mary, Ben, and Wilmer shook hands on the agreement, but none of them said out loud what they were thinking, that even after 6 months, the people of Ember would be hard-pressed to start a town. The founders of Sparks had known carpentry and farming. And even so, it had taken them 2 years just to build rough shelters and get the rocks out of the fields. The soil they had known how to manage animals and build good soil, but still, their animals sometimes died of disease and hunger, and in the many years that the crops failed, they had known to expect harsh winters, wolves, and bandits, and they still suffered losses from all three. The town leaders knew in their hearts that in this vast, empty country, where there were 1,000 dangerous people of Ember, did not understand. They would never be able to take care of themselves. Okay, so I think that chapter was like kind of like in the middle of the book. Like, it wasn't part of like Dune or Lena's story, so they didn't label it as chapter 5 because it was kind of like a side scene. Like, if you ever seen a play and the main characters are out and then they go away and then like something on the side happens, but it's, you know, not part of the main characters. That was just kind of a side like scene in the book because it was the townspeople talking. Chapter 5, The Pioneer. In the village the next morning, I'm sorry if you guys, it's too loud. There's a helicopter or something going right over me. In the village the next morning, criers ran through the streets, calling to the people of Sparks. They told them to bring out their old blankets, pillows, towels, and rags, and any other clothes they no longer needed. They were to heap these on the street in front of their houses. From the storehouse, people collected food, things that didn't need to be cooked, like apples from the prior fall, and dried apricots and bread and hunks of cheese. Dune had gotten up at the first sign of the light in the sky, watched these preparations with rising excitement. By midday, a caravan was moving southward out of the village. It was composed of strange vehicles that the villagers called truck wagons, or just trucks. They were made out of rusty metal and had 4 fat black wheels. At the front was a boxy part, just like the metal chest, with a rounded top. And behind was a higher box with 2 seats in it where the driver sat. The back of the truck was flat, where the crates of supplies were loaded. Attached to these trucks by sturdy rope were 2 big, squarish, muscular animals. By far the most enormous animals Dune had ever seen. They were made snuffling noises and sometimes a low sort of growl. "What are they?" Dune asked while someone was near them. "Oxen," the man answered, "like cows, you know, that milk comes from." Dune had never heard of cows. He had thought milk came as powder in a box. He didn't say this, of course. He just nodded. "And what does truck mean?" he asked. He understood the wagon part. The man looked surprised. "It just means truck," he said. "You know, what people used to drive in the old times. There were millions of them, trucks and cars everywhere. They used to run on their own without oxen. They had engines in there. You're up on the front of the truck. You poured stuff called gasoline on the engine, and it made the wheels turn. Now, since we don't have gasoline anymore, we take the engines out, and that makes the trucks light and easy to pull." Dune didn't ask what gasoline was. He wanted to show his ignorance all at once. He didn't want to show his ignorance all at once. That means, ignorance means like he didn't want to show like he looked dumb. He spread his questions around, find out a few things from one person at a time. He and his father walked along together beside one of the trucks. Dune had expected Lena to be with them, but by the time the caravan left, she hadn't come. That was all right. She'd easily find out where they'd gone and come later. Dune's father still had sore muscles from the long walk of the days before, so Dune went ahead of him. He was bursting with energy and joy, simply He was bursting with energy and joy and simply could not walk slowly. He took a deep breath of the sweet-smelling morning air. Over his head, the sky was a deep, clear blue, 1,000 times bigger than the black lid that covered Ember, and around him, the green and gold land seemed to stretch away from the out end. Dune kept wondering where the edges were. He made his way to the front of the procession and asked Wilmer, who was trotting along with his arms swinging jauntily. Edges, said Wilmer, glancing down. Yes, I mean, if I were standing way out there, he pointed to the horizon, where the sky seemed to meet the land, would I be at the edge of this place? And what's beyond that? There's no edge, said Wilmer at Dune, as if he had something wrong with him. The earth is a sphere, a huge round ball. If you keep going and going, you'd eventually come back to where it started. This nearly knocked the breath out of Dune. It was so strange and hard to comprehend. He thought at first that Wilmer was playing a joke on him, thinking he was a fool. But Wilmer's expression was plainly puzzled, not sly. He must be telling the truth. There were a million mysteries here, Dune thought. He would explore them all. He would learn everything. That morning he learned that the word sun, tree, wind, star, and bird. He learned dog, chicken, goat, and bread. He had never in his life felt so good. He felt as huge as the land around him and clear as bright as the air. No laboring in dunk tunnels here. No running through dark streets to escape pursuit. Now he was out in the free open. And he was powerful too, in a way he hadn't been before. He had done something remarkable, saved his people from their dying city, and along with Lena, he would be known for that deed all his life. He gazed around at this new world full of life and beauty, and he felt proud to have brought his people here. The road passed the last houses of the village and ran along the river, which was wide and slow, with grasses bending along its banks. The trucks rattled. Clouds at dusk billowed from their wheels. All around Dune rose a babble of voices as people pointed things out in tones of astonishment. Look! Something white floating in the sky! Did you see that little animal in the big tail? Did you feel that? The air is moving! Children darted every which way, daring each other to touch the broad sides of the oxen, plucking blossoms from the brambles at the edge of the road, jumping onto the trucks for a quick ride until they were shooed off again, and the sun shone down on everyone. The people of Ember loved the strange feeling of heat on the tops of their heads. They put their hands up to often touch their warm hair. The road went up a gentle rise and around the clump of trees. Here we are, cried Wilmer, sweeping his arm out proudly. The Pioneer Hotel. At the crest of the slope stood a building bigger than any Dune had ever seen. It was 3 stories high and very long, with a wing at each end perpendicular to the main point. Windows marched in 3 rows that sloped down to the river. Was what must once have been a grand entrance. Wide steps, a roof led up with columns, a double entryway, but the building was grand no more. It was very old, Dune could tell. Its walls were gray and stained, and most of the windows were no more than dark holes. The roof had sagged inward in some places. Grass grew right up to the steps and far down at the other end. Dune could see that a tree had fallen against the building and smashed a corner of it. Ben Barlow strode across the wide, wheelie field in the front of the hotel and climbed to the stairs. Wilmer followed. He leaned against a column, and Ben took a position on the top step and waited for the crowd of refugees to assemble before him. Dune wove among the people until he found his father again, and they stood together. Ben held up his hands and called, "Attention, please!" The crowd grew silent. "Welcome to your new home, the Pioneer Hotel," he said. A cheer arose from the crowd. Ben frowned and held up his hands, palms out, and the cheer died away. "It's temporary home only," he said. "We cannot, of course, keep you here in Sparks on a permanent basis. To do so would severely strain our resources and no doubt cause resentment and deprivation among our people."
He cleared his throat. We have decided that you may stay here for 6 months, through summer and fall, to the end of the month of chilling. After that time, with the training you'll receive from us, you will go out into the empty lands and found a village of your own. The people glanced at each other in surprise, found their own village. Some of them smiled eagerly at this idea, others looked uncertain. The city of Ember had been constructed for them, and they'd ever had to do was repair work as the buildings got older. They'd never built anything from scratch, but Dune said to himself, thinking about all this, I'm sure we can learn. Alright, that's where I'm going to stop. I tried to read a lot of pages because I really want to read this book and finish it for you guys by the end of the school year. Alright, you guys, this video is long enough. I'm going to go in and eat some dinner, then I'm going to film your math video, okay? Have a good day, everyone.